I want you to picture someone you know, someone smart, who thinks critically, reads books, asks good questions, would roll their eyes at the word cult. Someone who, if you describe a cult to them, they'd say, I would never. Now, I want to tell you that in 1978, more than 900 people died in a jungle in Guyana. And the people who died weren't the people you'd expect. They were nurses, teachers, attorneys, community organizers, people who had spent years doing meaningful work in the world, who were educated, idealistic, and genuinely trying to make things better. People who looked a lot like your smart, critical, eye rolling friend. They all joined because they thought they'd found something real. They all stayed because leaving had become impossible in ways they couldn't fully explain. And on November 18th, 1978, most of them drank cyanide mixed into a fruit drink in the middle of a jungle compound in South America. And the ones who didn't drink it were injected with it. And Jim Jones, the man who built their world, died with a gunshot wound to his temple, and 909 people were dead. I'm Dr. Nika, and today I want to talk about something that I think is one of the most misunderstood phenomena in psychology. Because the word cult makes people picture exactly what those 900 people in Jonestown look like from the outside: strange, isolated, obviously in too deep. It never shows you what they look like before, who they were when someone first said, "Hey, you should come check this out." What the thing felt from the inside before it became the thing we now call Jonestown. And that gap between what a cult looks like at the end and what it feels like at the beginning is the most important gap to understand, because you won't be protected by thinking it's obvious. It's specifically designed to not be obvious. That's the whole point. So let's go through it, all of it, from the first conversation to the moment you can't leave. Every step, because the steps matter more than the destination. Let's get the biggest myth out of the way first, because it's doing a lot of damage. The myth is that people who join cults are weak, naive, unstable, or stupid. That there's a certain kind of broken, lost, easily manipulated person who ends up in a cult. And if you're none of those, you're safe. This is completely wrong. And it's not just wrong, it's dangerously wrong, because it makes people feel immune to something they are absolutely not immune to. A sociologist named Robert Balk spent time inside a UFO cult in the 1970s as a researcher. He wanted to understand who these people actually were, and what he found was that members were, quote, mainly well educated from good families and suffering from minimal psychological problems, end quote. A respected Republican ranch owner who nearly won a state election in Colorado joined Heaven's Gate, the group that died in matching Nike sneakers waiting for a spaceship behind the Hale Bopp comet. Teachers joined. A woman with a master's degree in computer science from UCLA joined. A reader who'd been a straight A student joined, and for 14 years didn't see his family at all. Research done more recently confirms this across cult groups. Intelligence, it turns out, doesn't protect you. In some cases, it makes you more vulnerable. A psychiatrist named Robert Lifton, who spent his career studying thought reform and mind control, found that intelligent people can actually be faster to indoctrinate. Why? Because they're better at constructing explanations. They're better at finding reasons why the inconsistencies make sense. They engage more deeply with the intellectual framework the group provides. Their brain is a better tool for rationalizing, and rationalization exactly what the group needs you to do. So, if it's not stupidity or weakness, what does make someone vulnerable? Transition. That's what the research consistently points to. Cults don't look for broken people, they look for people in motion. People who just moved to a new city, ended a relationship, who just graduated and figuring out what's next. People who recently lost someone or lost a job or lost a sense of direction. People who are asking big questions about meaning and purpose and not getting satisfying answers from the world around them. That's not a personality flaw. That's Tuesday, right? That's being alive. Every single person goes through periods of transitions and searching and uncertainty. And that's exactly when someone appears and say, I think I know something that could help. Here's what the beginning of a cult actually feels like. You go to an event. Maybe a friend invited you, or you found it online. Maybe someone approached you at a moment where you were looking a little bit lost and asked if you wanted to talk. And you walk in, and within minutes, multiple people are making eye contact with you, smiling at you, asking about you, listening to your answers in a way that makes you feel like what you're saying actually matters. Someone remembers your name from a conversation you had briefly, or someone else brings you a drink without being asked. Two different people separately say something that feels impossibly specific, like they're reading your actual interior life, and they get it, like they get you. And you leave thinking, those are genuinely good people. There's something different about them. I want to go back. That experience has a name. It's called love bombing, and the term actually originated inside a cult. The Unification Church, the Moonies, is credited with coining the phrase in the 1970s. They use it to describe their own recruitment strategy, which tells you something important. They knew exactly what they were doing and named it. Love bombing in a cult setting isn't random warmth. It's a coordinated operation. Cult recruiters and more sophisticated groups have actual training programs for this. Keep notes on potential recruits. What are their interests? What have they lost? What are they looking for? And made them light up when they talked? What made them look sad? And that information gets shared within the group. So when you walk back in the second time, multiple people who've never met you seem to already understand you. They reference things you care about. They speak directly to the longing you didn't even fully admit you had. What feels like finding your people is coordinated covert effort to influence you. And it works. And it isn't because you're naive, just it's exploiting something real. The need to belong is one of the most fundamental human needs. It's not a weakness to have. Researchers link it to everything from mental health to physical health to lifespan. Humans are wired for belonging. Cults are wired to weaponize it. And here's the part that's most clinically interesting to me. What gets released in your brain during that initial love bombing period is basically the same chemistry as falling in love. Oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin. The warmth and connection feels real because neurologically they are real. The emotions are genuine. The brain doesn't know the relationship is manufactured. It responds to belonging the same way every time. And then, very slowly, things start to shift. We talked about the bite model in the previous episode, and I said it was developed by a psychologist named Stephen Hassan, who spent time in the Moonies himself before being deprogrammed and dedicating the rest of his career to understanding what had happened to him. To review it again, BITE stands for behavior, information, thought, and emotional control. And the argument is that if a group can systematically control all four of those things, they can own someone's mind, not surgically or through drugs, just through structure, through environment, the slow, patient construction of a world where your perception of reality is managed by someone else. let's go through each one, and I'm going to be very specific because the general version isn't useful. The details are what makes this recognizable. Behavior control first. This is the most visible one, so people tend to think it's the one that gives cults away. Weird clothes, strange schedules, rules about who you can see. And yes, those things happen. But in the early stages of high control group, behavior control looks much more ordinary. It's we ask that members attend meetings on these nights. It's we have a dietary practice you might want to try. And we tend to find it's better not to spend too much time with people who have a lot of negative energy. None of those are alarming on their own. You've probably heard all of those sentences from people who aren't in cults. The difference is what happens when you don't comply. In a healthy group, you skip a meeting and nobody says anything. In a high control group, you skip a meeting and someone follows up. Someone is a little cooler towards you. Someone asks if everything is okay in a way that makes it clear that skipping was noticed. The rule isn't announced, the consequences, and you'll learn the rule through the consequence. And here's why behavior control is so powerful. It rewires identity. If you act like a member long enough, you start to feel like a member. The behaviors aren't just compliance, they're becoming you. Your routine is now their routine. Your social life is now their events. Your eating, sleeping, appearance, schedule, and the self that existed before those behaviors starts to become someone you used to be. Someone with less clarity, less purpose, less belonging. Robert Lifton, the psychiatrist, called the first and most important feature of thought reform milieu control, the control of the environment and communication. And he argued it's the foundation on which everything else is built. Because if you control the environment, you control the information that gets into it. And if you control the information, you control what reality looks like. Which brings us to information control. This one's the sneakiest, and I think it's the most powerful because it doesn't announce itself. In a high control group outside, information doesn't get banned on day one. That would be obvious. What happens instead is more subtle. The group starts reinterpreting the outside world for you. Quote, you might hear negative things about us from people who don't understand, end quote. Or, critics of our work tend to have agendas, and a lot of what's out there about us is deliberately misleading. So by the time you actually encounter a critical article, a concerned friend, an investigative journalist, you already have a framework for it. It's someone who doesn't understand, or someone with an agenda who is deceived. Your pre-installed response to the counterargument activates before you've even fully heard the counterargument. You're not thinking your way to conclusion. You were handed the conclusion before the information arrived. Lifton called this loading the language. The group develops specific terminology, phrases, ways of describing reality that only make sense from the inside the group. And those phrases function as shortcuts that bypass critical thinking. Someone raises a concern and the response is a loaded phrase that sounds like an answer but actually just stops the conversation. You've heard versions of these. Trust the process. That's your ego talking. Outsiders wouldn't understand. These are what Lifton called thought terminating cliches. They're not answers, they're conversation enders, and over time you start using them on yourself. A doubt arises, and before it fully forms, a phrase appears, and that doubt gets filed away. Now, thought control. This one's the direct extension of what I just described. Once a group controls your behavior and your information environment, thought control happens almost automatically because the thoughts you can think are shaped by the information you have access to, and the behaviors you're performing are constantly reinforcing the group's worldview. But high control groups also do something more active. They train you to interrupt your own critical thinking. Specifically, they train you to interrupt doubt. When a doubt arises, you're given a tool: pray, chant, confess, work harder, serve more. Whatever the group specific mechanism is, it functions the same way. It gives your brain something to do with the doubt that's not examining it. And the more you use the tool, the more automatic it becomes, until doubt and the thought stopping response are linked, until the doubt can't fully surface before the interruption begins. This isn't metaphysical. This is neuroscience. Repeated suppression of a thought pattern weakens that pattern. The question you stop asking, the question you stop asking often enough eventually stops asking itself. And you don't notice it's gone because you weren't watching for it. You were busy serving, praying, working, attending. And finally, emotional control, the most powerful of the four, in my clinical opinion, and the one most people overlook because it sounds softer than the others. High control groups regulate what you're allowed to feel and when. And more importantly, they control what you feel toward other people. People who leave the group become spiritually dangerous, contaminated, tragic figures who chose the wrong path. People inside the group become family, the only family that really understands. Your entire emotional map gets redrawn. Joy is associated with group activities. Belonging is experienced only with group members. Anxiety and shame are the price of doubt or disobedience. Love is conditional on compliance. And here's what that does to the decision to leave. Leaving the group doesn't just mean leaving a set of beliefs. It means leaving your entire social world. Your friends are in there. In many groups, your actual family is in there. Your daily routines, your sense of purpose, identity, the version of yourself that makes sense is in there. The outside world hasn't felt real in years. So when someone asks why you don't just leave, the answer is leave to what? Leave to who? You've been inside a system that spent years systematically eliminating the outside world as an option. The door exists, it just doesn't lead anywhere that feels survivable. Let me come back to Jonestown because I want to go deeper than the famous image. Most people know two things about Jamestown: the Kool-Aid thing, which for the record was actually Flavor Aid, and the body count, 909 people. What most people don't know is what the years leading up to that day looked like from the inside. The People's Temple started in Indiana in the 1950s. Jim Jones was a preacher who built his ministry around two things that were genuinely powerful and needed in that moment: racial integration and social justice. This was a white man in the American Midwest in the 1950s running an integrated church. That was radical. That was dangerous and meaningful. People of color who had been told for their entire lives that they were less than walked into that church and were told they were equal, they were loved, and family. You understand why people came and why they stayed. This was real. The belonging was real. Purpose. And the community was real. And then it shifted, slowly. The rules got stricter. Jones started demanding more. He started to require confessions of members' private fears and failures, which he would then hold on and occasionally deploy. He started running what were called catharsis sessions, where members had to publicly admit to wrongdoings. These weren't just ritual humiliation, they were intelligence gathering. He knew what everyone was afraid of. He knew what everyone had done. And everyone knew he knew. Members worked brutal hours. Sleep deprivation became normal. The exhausted brain is much less capable of critical thinking than the rested brain. That's not spiritual insight, that's biology. Jones, whether deliberately or instinctively, was creating conditions where doubt became physiologically harder to sustain. By the time the group moved to Jonestown in Guyana, they were in the jungle, physically isolated, no way out that wasn't through Jones. Armed guards, punishment for speaking negatively about the compound that escalated from public humiliation to something called the box, a coffin sized wooden structure you were put in underground. Jones was drugging members. When the compound was searched after the massacre, there were enough pharmaceutical doses to treat every member hundreds of times over. And the thing that I keep coming back to clinically is none of this happened overnight. Every step had a logic to it. Every step in isolation had an explanation. People didn't wake up one day and find themselves in the jungle being fed cyanide. They made 1,000 small decisions over years, each one reasonable given the information they had and the emotional world they were living in. The most chilling piece of audio from Jamestown is what's called the death tape, a recording made on November 18th, 1978. You can hear Jones speaking, you can hear people crying, and also you can hear a woman, standing up and arguing, saying this isn't right, saying we can leave, and the children at least should be given a chance. The crowd shouts her down. The members themselves, not Jones, the members who had been so thoroughly shaped by years inside the system that when one person tried to be a door, they closed it themselves. That's the end point of full emotional control, when the cage runs on the people inside it. I want to make sure I'm being clear about something, because I think when people hear about Jonestown or Heaven's Gate, they file it under obviously extreme and move on. And that filing is the problem. The mechanisms I've described aren't exclusive to groups that end in mass death. They exist on a spectrum. And at the lower end of that spectrum, you've definitely encountered them. The gym culture, where people are shamed for taking rest days. The wellness community, where questioning the protocols means you're not committed to your healing. The religion that practices shunning. The formal, systematic social death of anyone who leaves or questions. The multi level marketing company, where your upline is your family, community, your entire social world. And leaving means losing all of it. None of those are Jonestown, and all of them are using the same architecture at a different volume. The Jehovah's Witnesses, to use a documented example, practice what they call disfellowshipping. If you leave the organization, members, including your own family, are required to cut contact with you entirely. It's not a choice, it's a mandate. You don't leave the Jehovah's Witness and keep your friends and family and then also leave the belief system. You leave and they're gone. Your mother stops returning your calls. Siblings act like you don't exist. Your whole social world, which the organization spent years becoming entirely of, disappears the moment you walk out. Research published in the International Journal for the Psychology of Religion found that former Jehovah's Witnesses described significant emotional, social, and practical struggles after leaving. They describe shunning, loss of identity, and complete disorientation. The transition isn't just leaving a belief, it's losing your entire life and rebuilding from nothing, usually with no support system because your support system was in there. That's information control, emotional control, behavior control enforced through social consequences. It's bite at scale inside a mainstream religious organization with millions of members. And most people wouldn't describe it as a cult at all. And that's exactly the point. The word cult is a container that lets us put the extreme cases somewhere far away from ourselves. It protects us from recognizing the architecture when it appears in a form we're more comfortable with. I want to spend a few minutes on this because I think it's the thing people understand least. And it's the thing that most directly affects whether survivors are able to get help. People ask, why didn't they just leave? And I want you to understand why that question, asked about cult membership, is almost identical to asking why abuse victims don't just leave. The answer is structurally the same. By the time someone is deeply in a high control group, here's what leaving actually means. Your social network is gone or entirely inside the group. The people who might have support you on the outside have been kept at a distance for years, and the group has pre-interpreted them as spiritually dangerous or not understanding. Reaching back out requires humility that's been trained out of you. Because in the group, admitting that group was wrong is admitting you were wrong for years, and that's a lot of identity dismantled. Your sense of self has been rebuilt around membership. Your name might literally be different. Your relationships, routine, purpose, all of it, it's in there. The person you were before the group join feels like a stranger, and the world outside has been described to you for years as spiritually empty, dangerous, contaminated. Walking into it feels like walking into nothing. There's something else. A high control group doesn't just make leaving hard through social consequences, it makes leaving psychologically impossible by installing what researchers call phobias. Not clinical phobias, conditioned fear responses to the idea of leaving. Quote, people who leave the group are spiritually destroyed, or former members lose everything, and leaving is abandoning truth. End quote. These get planted early and watered constantly, and they produce a genuine fear response when the thought of leaving arises. The brain registers leaving as dangerous, and a brain that registers something as dangerous doesn't do it casually. Stephen Hassan describes this as a cult building, a second identity inside the person, a group self that exists alongside the original self, and the group self has its own values, its own social connections, own sense of purpose, and the two selves are in conflict, and the group self has all the resources. The original self is in there, it doesn't disappear. Former members almost universally describe a moment, sometimes years in, where they suddenly saw something that didn't fit. A small thing, something they couldn't rationalize, and they felt it land differently than the other times. A crack. Not enough to leave yet, but a crack. Those cracks are where recovery starts. I want to tell you something that might be uncomfortable. I study high control groups professionally, and I understand the mechanics. I can map every tactic onto a model and explain exactly what it's doing to the brain. And I'm not immune to it myself. Nobody is. Because the thing that makes cults psychologically work isn't stupidity, and it's not weakness or broken family systems, childhood trauma, though those can be factors. The thing that makes it work is human need, the need to belong, for certainty in the uncertain world, the need for meaning and purpose, and to feel like what you're doing matters, the need to be known and understood by people who care about you. Those needs aren't pathological, they're not even problems. They're the most human things about being human. Cults work because they offer real answer to real needs. The belonging, community, sense of purpose, all feels real. The feeling of being understood is real. The only thing that isn't real is the framework surrounding all of it. The claim to exclusive truth. the portrait of the outside world as dangerous, the requirement that your access to love and community be conditional on compliance. The legitimate staff is what pulls you in. The controlling structure is what keeps you there. And by the time the structure is visible, the legitimate stuff has become so load bearing that dismantling the structure feels like destroying everything that matters. I want to also say this: the people who build these groups aren't evil masterminds. Some of them are. Some cult leaders are fully aware, calculating, and deliberately predatory. Jim Jones, by the end, almost certainly knew exactly what he was doing. But some of them started with something genuine, a real vision, community, a desire to offer something meaningful. And then fear took over. Fear of losing the group's trust, or being questioned, or the outside world that was watching critically. And the control mechanisms that started as management became a cage, which doesn't make it okay. The cage is the cage, whether the builder knew they were building one or not. And that's the pattern I keep coming back to. In every episode this season, we keep arriving at the same place. The harm doesn't always come from evil. Sometimes it comes from fear, from need, from a system that started with good intentions and became something the original intention couldn't have imagined. So here's what I want you to take from this: the cult doesn't look like a cult at the beginning. It looks like the best community you've ever found, like people who finally understand you, like purpose and belonging and answer. And those feelings are real. The manipulation underneath them is also real. And those two things coexist in a way that makes it almost impossible to see from the inside. The research is very clear on what actually protects people. It's not intelligence or skepticism, though skepticism helps. It's connection. People with robust social networks outside of any one group are significantly harder to control because isolation is the first tool every high control system reaches for. If you have multiple places you belong, meet multiple people who know you, anchors to identify outside of any single community, you're harder to fully pull in. And the question I keep asking this season is, does this open from the inside? Can you leave the community and keep your friends? Can you question the beliefs and be met with engagement rather than punishment? Can you choose not to attend and have nobody track you down to ask why? Can you be a member who also has a full life outside the membership? If yes, you're in a community. Communities are good. It's necessary. They can have flaws and still be good. If no, then whatever you're calling it, the architecture is the same. The volume is just different. Next episode, we're going somewhere even darker because everything I described today, every single tactic we walk through, has been scaled, put inside a system, given institutional authority, given white coats and clipboards, and the ability to legally hold you in a building. What happens when the people in charge of deciding whether you're sane and whether you get to go home are using the same tools that Jim Jones used? What happens when the group is called a hospital? That's next week. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.